Hi and welcome to this first video in a series covering CodeIgniter, the PHP framework from Lab. It is an open source framework, by the way, in case you're wondering, so you're free to work with it in pretty much whatever way you'd like. If you browse to www.codeigniter.com, you'll be pulled along to the Lab website where you can download the code. Once you've downloaded the code and unzipped it, these are the files and folders that you're presented with. The ones that we're particularly interested in, although of course the user guide is extremely useful and you do need a quick glance at the license, but the files and folders we're particularly interested in is application, index.php and the system folder. I've gone ahead and created a new project in my web folder, root directory, in my local setup called my site, and I've copied in application, index.php and system. Just a word on local server setups. I'm on a Mac here, so I use a program called MAMP, which allows me to create a local domain called whatever I like and just point it to the folder in my main projects directory. If you're on Windows, there is an application called WAMP, which I have used myself, and it's certainly a good way to get up and running with Apache MySQL and PHP setup on Windows. And there's also a newer one which I haven't tried yet, which is Desktop Server. This is available for Windows and Mac, I believe, at the moment. Haven't tried it, but it does look very good. Anyway, those are your options. So the next thing then is we'll take a look at what that code consists of. I'm in my project folder, and we can see that application contains a whole bunch of files and folders, as does system. You'll be working in your application directory almost all the time, where as you develop your app. The system folder, you very rarely need to be in there. That's all the core files that make up the framework itself, the libraries, the database, and so on. So one of the first things we need to do to get CodeIgniter up and running is access the config file that you can see open here, config.php in application config. We don't need to do too much setting up in the first place with CodeIgniter. It's a very light, easy to set up framework. One thing we do need though is to add config base URL. You'll notice that all these config options are in a PHP array, and the first one we must set is base URL. A bit later on in a future video I'll show you how we can use PHP itself to evaluate which site we're at and therefore what this base URL is set to, but for now we'll just keep it as our local domain. The other one, by default, when you first open your copy of config.php, you'll see index.php in the index page value. I've removed it because I'm intending on using a htaccess file. I do have mod rewrite switched on in Apache, so that means I can create or use rather pretty URLs. I shall show you that htaccess file shortly. So we set base URL and we set the index page. Now at that stage we should be able to point to our application in the browser, mysite.dev in my case, and you'll be presented with the default welcome page from CodeIgniter. So really we've done absolutely the minimum setting up. However, we can push on a little bit further. If we look in autoload.php, for example, this file is used to load or automatically load PHP resources such as the database library, which I've added to this array here. CodeIgniter will go ahead and load the database library so that I've got access to it from anywhere in my code as I start adding controllers, models to flesh out the functionality I want for the app. I've also added the URL helper, which I know from experience with CodeIgniter is particularly useful to have available pretty much all the time. The rule of thumb with auto-loading in CodeIgniter, as far as I'm concerned, is if you find yourself using a resource more often than not, then it's worth auto-loading it. Otherwise, just load it as and when you need it. So we'll start with database and URL. While I'm as the helpers, while I'm talking about database, I've also used an app called SQL Pro, which is available on Mac. You can use whatever database GUI you might be familiar with on your system to create a MySite database, and I've also created a user with the necessary schema privileges for the MySite database. The credentials for that user then go in application, config and database. What we've got here then are some settings to tell CodeIgniter exactly what those credentials are, what the name of our database is, and once we've got those settings added, when we reload our mysite.dev page here, we should still get the page load without any errors. If for whatever reason CodeIgniter can't connect to your database, it will usually be because you've mistyped the password or something like that, then you will actually see an error when you attempt to load it in the browser. So we've downloaded CodeIgniter, we've unzipped it, we've copied it into a project folder in our web root, we've set up a local domain ready to start developing our app, and we've hooked up a MySQL database for CodeIgniter to talk to. We've also auto-loaded some resources that we're going to want to use all the time. So that just leaves the htaccess file, which is this one here. There are a number of htaccess files like this one spread around CodeIgniter itself. These are designed purely to attempt to stop access from the public access, that is to say via the browser, people trying to access parts of the application that we don't want them to get to. So they exist in several places, but this htaccess doesn't come by default with CodeIgniter, but it's one that I've used almost for as long as I've been using CodeIgniter itself, and it's got some interesting parameters in actual fact. We've got a rule here that stops access to the systems directory at all. It'll just redirect, any attempt to access system will redirect straight to the root of the application, the index.php page, and equally any attempts to access an individual resource such as an image, CSS document or a JavaScript file will also redirect to index.php. I also have a rewrite rule here. If for some reason mod rewrite isn't installed in Apache, it will generate an error when we're using pretty URLs, but at least it'll return back to the root index.php page and instead of causing an ugly error for our users to see. So that's the .htaccess file. We'll do more, and you'll see more in future videos about how to roll out pretty URLs and also routing in CodeIgniter. So that's it. We've got the basic application set up. It's working. Now we can start building our application. See you next time.